Hello, everyone. Welcome to Family Source Consultants Podcast. My name is Chris Gao, and I will be your host today. In this episode, we will be talking about the legal insights on surrogacy and egg donation for international intended parents. And today, we have the pleasure of having an expert in the industry joining us today. Please welcome Marla.neufeld. Hi, Marla.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I feel like there should be an audience applause
I
after
know,
that.
I know, right? We really should.
Cue
It's
the live
absolutely
audience.
It really is our pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to, share your knowledge and experience with our listeners out there. Before we
My
start,
pleasure.
can you please just introduce yourself and your firm to us?
Yes, absolutely. So, as you said, my name is Marla Neufeld. I'm a Florida licensed reproductive attorney. I'm actually a former intended parent. So, I worked with a surrogate to have my own children. I've been practicing in this area of law for 11 plus years. And I work at a law firm named Greenspoon Martyr. We are a national law firm and we handle all sorts of areas of law. I focus and founded the reproductive law practice group and just really happy to be here today. I've worked with Family Source
Wow.
for all my 11 plus years as well.
Yes, absolutely. We at FSC, we basically have been working with Marla for a long time, and we helped countless intended parents together, and we are so appreciate for, for being such a great attorney out there, and for also being such a great partner to FSC.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
So today, as I mentioned, we'll focus on the legal insights for international intended parents. And, recently I've been getting questions from international intended parents, about the uncertainty in the United States, where things are headed, and
Yes.
whether, it will continue to be safe for surrogacy and egg donation. So before we dive into the details, can you please walk us through the basic legal process that international intended parents should follow when they pursue surrogacy or egg donation in the United States?
Yes, absolutely. So I often work with international intended parents from all over the world. And what I tell all of my intended parents or single intended parent is that they really need to consider two different sets of laws. They need to, at least, and speak to two different attorneys. So one would be understanding the laws in the United States
Hmm.
in the state where the process is going to take place. So the first attorney
Right.
they need to speak with, and I always recommend this at the very beginning, is an experienced reproductive attorney in the applicable US state, which might change as they get matched with a surrogate, because
Yeah.
they really need to understand which US state will permit that parent from proceeding with surrogacy, whether it's a same sex couple, single parent,
Hmm.
genetic material. So it really can all differ depending on the state that they work in.
Right.
The second step that I also recommend from the very beginning of the process is to speak with an attorney in their home country, one that's
Hmm.
knowledgeable about surrogacy, so that they understand once they've legally done everything within the United States, what steps do they have to take back home to be
Hmm.
recognized as the parent and not have any difficulties registering or being acknowledged as the parents in their home country. So, right off
Absolutely.
the bat, two lawyers, and it might be more, but
Yes.
understanding what these steps might be from the very beginning. I mean, just as like right off the bat, there's some states that don't allow in the United States that don't allow fully international parents. Like for example, the New York statute, one parent has to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. So that's something that they need to know. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, they'll be matched accordingly by FSC. But these are just a lot of things to think about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I can't agree more that I think, intended parents should talk to a lawyer in the United States, but in addition to that, talk to a lawyer in their home country and really understand what documents they need in order to bring their baby back home smoothly and get the citizenship of their home country.
Yeah, and this is something that's helpful to me too if I'm representing the parent or the parents, because there's things that I won't know not being an attorney not licensed in the other country. For example, will the intended parents need an apostille on their documents? Do they need a
Hmm.
pre-birth and or do they need a post-birth order?
Hmm.
So there's certain things that if I'm not guided by that attorney abroad,
Right.
there's just no way for me to know. I mean, I know from experience. I
Yes.
mean, for example, France requires this very special affidavit that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be entered into with an apostille stamp. So these are things
Mm-hmm.
that the attorney abroad needs to tell me. And one more
Right.
attorney to add to the mix, I also think it's important for international intended parents to speak to an immigration attorney, which my firm does
Mm-hmm.
have, or it can be anyone experienced in immigration law, to make sure they
Mm-hmm.
have the legal ability to travel and stay within the United
Mm-hmm.
States for,
Right.
the anticipated amount of time plus the potential of an extra amount of time if the baby, God forbid, needs additional time in the hospital.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that is a very important reminder. Thank you. So you mentioned, sometimes intended parents may need to switch attorneys based on, the state. Can
Yes.
you elaborate a little bit more? Why is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning of the process, when people are just seeking information, they might not be matched yet, and
Mm-hmm.
I welcome those initial calls just to get a sense of what the process might look like. But for
Mm-hmm.
example, if an intended parent's hoping to be matched in Florida, many from South America have homes here and they want to be
Mm-hmm.
matched in Florida, we can talk about Florida law, but if they end up being matched with a surrogate in Illinois or California, the legal
Mm-hmm.
analysis will change. So whether I
Right.
can still help them, we have other offices that can help them. They might, in fact, need to be referred to another attorney in another state to understand
Mm-hmm.
the laws. Is it pre-birth? Is it a pre-birth state? Is it a post-birth state? Is a hearing required? Will the parents need to actually
Right.
go to court? So
Right.
that's why the law and the lawyer might change. My general rule of thumb is that the
Mm-hmm.
state of the birth is typically, not always, but a good
Mm-hmm.
guideline of what lawyer they should be speaking to, at least as a starting point.
Right. Yes, I agree 100%. But then my follow-up question to you, a lot of intended parents and international intended parents ask this question. Do both the intended parents attorney and the surrogate attorney have to be licensed in the state where the baby is expected to be born, or in the state where the state law will be utilized?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into what state law will apply, and each
Mm-hmm.
attorney has to follow their own guidelines of what laws they're able to practice in. I mean, the best lawyer answers I can give is it just depends, is typical
Mm-hmm.
lawyer answer. I mean, some lawyers are licensed in multiple states, so they
Right.
might be fine to have, if someone's licensed in New York and Florida and California, like they might be able to still represent.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, both lawyers should typically be licensed in the state where the parentage is taking place.
Mm-hmm.
Although it might need to use, a surrogate might be represented by an attorney in her home in a different state just to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that that
Right.
law is also considered. So it's really a case by case determination. I guess the general starting point is whatever law you're using, there should be lawyers in that state to some extent.
Hmm. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for, for the detailed explanation. I think that's very, very helpful to, to our listeners out there. So the next question I wanted to talk about with you is some of the legal challenges. Like, we always tell intended parents that we wish the smoothest and the most easy
Yeah.
journey on everyone, but it does not always happen because there's so many parties involved and it's a very complicated process. There may be hiccups here and there. So, in your experience, what are some of the most common legal challenges intended parents face, especially international intended parents face? And if you can
Yeah.
think of examples for egg donation and surrogacy separately, that would be great. But if not, like, just overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, as you mentioned at the very beginning, it is an unsettled climate. So I just think it's really important that intended parents stay in close communication with the US and international attorney to closely monitor what the laws are, because what
Mm-hmm.
the process might be at the beginning of their journey might not be the same later on. So for example,
Mm-hmm.
just this month in May, Spain has made it more difficult for parents to register their babies and return
Right.
home. Last year it was Italy. So and I've had parents caught in the mix where it was fine
Mm-hmm.
for them
Mm-hmm.
to enter into this process and do this broad, and then it changed. And when that
Right.
happens, the fact that they have that attorney in both places, international and back in the US, set up in communication with one another really helps. Like, for example, in a recent case with Spain, like I was in close communication with the attorney in Spain. We understand what steps they need to take to get back home and they now have to do some form of an adoption. So
Mm-hmm.
just really good, close communication with lawyers, and don't just check in at the beginning and then
Mm-hmm.
say, see you at the hospital. Like, keep in
Right.
touch and check in would be helpful.
Yes.
Another important thing, like I mentioned, is just making sure the parents have the legal ability to travel and stay here. I have
Mm-hmm.
seen parents be concerned about, they're needing to return back home due to the time they
Right.
have under whatever visa they're here for.
Yep.
Hopefully, this never happens again, but I obviously saw issues with COVID with getting here in time
Yes.
and not being able to leave.
Right.
And, I had a very few cases where the surrogate actually agreed to take the baby home from the hospital because the parents, I mean, this was with COVID,
Or
they could
not.
not get here for a long time.
I know. That was the time we're facing.
Yeah. And I mean, just now that COVID's over, hopefully, I mean, even just international intended parents need to budget that things don't go as planned. The baby is not on a calendar as much as we all might think. So you need
Absolutely.
to be able to stop your work and get on a plane and get here.
Yes.
And it might need to be earlier than you anticipate to make sure, to the best extent possible, you can be here for the birth. Another thing the parents should really make sure they understand and have a good comprehension at the very beginning of the process, and I know this is something FSC will walk them through, is how the medical bills are going to be paid for the baby. I mean, obviously the
Mm-hmm.
surrogate, but the baby as well, given that if they're
Right.
not US citizens and might not have
Yes.
US health insurance, what options do they have available to them to
Mm-hmm.
have coverage for the baby, or will they have to pay out of pocket and make sure that they've budgeted for that and they've
Yep.
funded escrow sufficiently? So understanding that.
Absolutely. I again, thank you so much for sharing these. These come from your experience, and these are, I just wanted our listeners to know, these are absolutely real life potential challenges. And I think, part of working with or choosing a good attorney and a surrogacy agency and fertility clinic is to work with, is to work with a party that will share these possibilities with you up front. So they're honest and upfront about what could possibly go wrong. Obviously, no one can predict everything, but at least we will share these relatively common hiccups with you so you can prepare in advance and this is an area where this could possibly happen. So we help you prepare, if it does happen.
Definitely helpful. And like I said, my very first piece of advice is to have an experienced attorney in the United States and one back home that can all
Hmm.
communicate together to address each
Exactly.
concern in turn.
Yeah, exactly. So how people always talk about how the United States is one of the best country, if not the best, in terms of legal protection when it comes to surrogacy. I know you are licensed in Florida in the United States, obviously, but based on what you know, would you feel comfortable explaining why the United States has the best legal protection compared to other countries where surrogacy is also considered legal? And if you could speak of the legal framework or the potential challenge in some other countries, that would be great. But if, again, understanding you're only licensed in the United States, if you don't feel comfortable commenting on other countries, that's fine too.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, just within the United States, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but there are certain medical protections that we know are governed by the FDA, the CDC. So you know
Hmm.
that the medical screening of the surrogate, of the egg donor, is all done with very careful considerations for the health of all the parties. And we can't necessarily guarantee that other countries are testing and making sure that everything is safe with the handling of human tissue being transferred to
Right.
another person. So that's just a medical
Hmm.
standpoint, not legal.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I don't handle matters where the surrogate is abroad, so I don't have personal experience to share, but I obviously read the news and I hear horror stories from other people, and I hear problems such as the level of communication between intended parents and surrogate within the United States, within your contract.
Hmm.
Everybody's agreeing to have open communication, sharing of medical records, parents' potential ability to go to appointments to the extent they can make it. I've heard of issues in other countries where the parents literally have no communication with their surrogate. They're just told when a baby's delivered and they have to just show up.
Right.
And you don't know the process of being able to leave that other country.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
the political climate in other countries might be
Right.
dangerous. I know there were issues with, I read in the news in Ukraine where surrogates were literally hiding out in bomb shelters, to stay safe during political unrest. So, to the extent the United States is a safer country,
Yes.
and has, some political stability, although there is political issues in the United States to be aware of, and to continue to monitor. One of the big questions I get from international intended parents is the issue of birthright citizenship. When
Mm-hmm.
Trump took office, a lot of parents were concerned regarding, actions that Trump took regarding whether or not a baby born in the United States would be deemed a U.S. citizen.
Yep.
We're continuing to monitor that. As of now, there's been no real change to that. So a baby born to international intended parents in the United States is still a U.S. citizen.
Mm-hmm.
So the legal protections of having citizenship for the baby to then be able to get a U.S. passport and go back home
Right.
is still
Right.
protected.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I know we spent a decent amount of time talking about surrogacy, but what about egg donation? What does the legal framework look like for egg donation?
Yeah, I mean, the egg donation portion is a little more straightforward. The time period span is not the same as surrogacy.
Mm-hmm.
So while there still are steps and protections to take, the concerns are not as great as the surrogacy. Obviously, again, very important. My same advice that the international intended parents speak to a reproductive attorney in the United States to understand what the
Mm-hmm.
laws are regarding the donation of genetic material, to make
Right.
sure that they'll be protected under the whatever law or legal framework that's in place in that state to receive and have full ownership of the donated material, and to
Mm-hmm.
speak with an attorney in the home country, because I know there are certain countries that do pose greater difficulties if
Right.
both the parents are not genetically related, or if one parent's not genetically related.
Mm-hmm.
For same-sex couples to consider this, to make sure that they understand what the steps will need to be,
Mm-hmm.
as far as using donated genetic material. I've seen cases where the international attorney has said, we have to state who the genetic parent is. And then some say, we don't want to state who the genetic parent is. Definitely considerations to think about in egg donation, really just starting with understanding what the laws are in each state. Again, my general rule of thumb with egg donation, what attorney to speak to in the United States would be the state typically of the egg donor.
Mm-hmm.
It could possibly be the location of the clinic. But
Mm-hmm.
again, you would have to confirm that with your reproductive attorney to make sure that would work under the laws.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned the contract between the intended parent or the receiving parents and the egg donor. Can you
Yeah.
just tell us a little bit about what goes into the contract and how long does it usually
Yeah.
take to draft and sign that contract?
Yeah. So within a typical egg donation agreement, the best practice, and sometimes required by certain state law, requires that the intended parents have their own attorney and that they will pay for a separate attorney to represent the egg donor and her spouse if
Hmm.
she's married.
Hmm.
The egg donation agreement will go into a bunch of different things: confidentiality, how many retrievals she's willing to do, what the payment terms will be, what if she's getting paid, for her expenses in association with the retrieval, what the travel expenses are going to be like, who's
Hmm.
responsible for the medical expenses, which is the intended parents, but paying the parents' obligation to pay for all the medications and the medical process for the retrieval. And we
Hmm.
address what their responsibility is for any complications. So typically,
Right.
the FSC encourages parents to buy a donor complication policy. It's an
Hmm.
additional insurance that the agency can walk parents through to understand.
Hmm.
But that would cover any, God forbid, donor complications that the parents aren't out of pocket for, any kind of catastrophic reaction from the egg donation.
Right.
Um, we talk about future communication and,
Hmm.
taking a huge step back, whether the donation is anonymous, known, semi-known,
Yep.
what
Hmm.
the relationship is between the donor and the parents. I mean, many times we do anonymous. During
Right.
COVID, we had to make them all known. Many of the clinics
Hmm.
were requiring known for purposes of having informed consent.
Hmm.
So that's, some of the typical things that go into an egg donation agreement, whether you're international or not.
Yeah, absolutely. That plays a part too. What about the surrogacy contract? I imagine there,
Yeah.
the content cover, there may be some overlapping between egg donation contract and a surrogacy contract. Obviously, be the same intended parents, but with a different party on the other end, and it will, talk about the intended parents' rights and protection and the
Yeah.
cost and stuff. But what are some of the other things that will go into a surrogacy
Yeah.
contract? Because as far as I know, a surrogacy contract is a lot longer, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so same thing with a surrogacy agreement, separate
Mhm,
attorneys, intended parent, separate attorney for the surrogate and her spouse, who should also join the agreement if she's married.
mhm,
The surrogacy agreement goes into similar concepts like you mentioned for egg donation, payment
mhm,
terms, who's paying
mhm,
for the medical expenses, what insurance is being used for the surrogate and for the baby, confidentiality, future contact. But some of the notable different provisions, some pertain just surrounding the actual birth. I mean, who's in the delivery room and the parents' rights to access to the child and decision making authority. The parents take over as the parent immediately after the birth.
right.
Abortion and reduction is a huge
Hmm.
part of the surrogacy agreement that's addressed, that ensuring that the parents and the surrogate see eye to eye with the concept, if God forbid there was an abnormality or other medical issue, is the surrogate agreeable to terminate the pregnancy if the
Hmm.
parents would want her to? And if the state law has restrictive abortion laws, which again is a state to state issue,
Hmm.
whether she's willing or able to travel at the parent's expense. So that's a really important concept that FSC will talk about at the matching process that certainly gets addressed in the agreement. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, the importance of an escrow account.
Hmm.
Many times it's used in egg donation as well, but in surrogacy, I believe like their agency requires that. It's a
Yes,
best
absolutely.
practice. Yeah, some states require it by law, not all, but and then for an intended parent, you really have to make sure that you can budget the amount that's required in escrow
Hmm.
because it's a
Exactly.
lot, but it's to protect the process, to protect the surrogate,
Hmm.
and that the parents understand how much needs to remain in the account throughout the
Yep.
process, maintaining minimum balances. And I see it a lot, just giving enough time for the money to arrive here, because there's wire delays and
Hmm.
international transfer fees. So just give yourself enough time to make sure things are funded timely, really to avoid concern, because nothing
Hmm.
sparks more concern than if money hasn't arrived and a surrogate's needing to get a payment.
Exactly, absolutely. Sometimes intended parents will say, or will just ask, why does it take weeks to sign a surrogacy contract? I'm just like, I'm just ready to sign. Well, Marla just give you some examples of what goes into the contract, and the list just goes on and on. That's why it's such, this process is not. I understand, every intended parent wants to have a baby as soon as possible, but also at the
Yeah,
same
and I
time, there
understand.
is, right? Yeah, we understand that. Just know that every professional involved is doing their very best to help you have a baby as soon as possible. But sometimes, certain steps really do take time, and we can't just skip steps, or we can't just like, oh, let's just get it signed tomorrow, and
Right.
because this is going to be very, very important, making sure you have protected and also a smooth journey moving forward.
Yeah, and it's really not a boilerplate agreement. It needs to be customized, it needs to be understood. And I didn't actually address your question, but as timing wise, that's a tough one because a lot of it depends on everyone's schedules. I mean, I always try to get a draft as quickly as possible. A
Mhm.
general rule of thumb, and this is not always the case, is I would at least, at a minimum, give a week on the IP side, a
Mhm.
week on the surrogate side, but it could be more. I mean, if it's we just got through
Yes,
Memorial Day weekend, people were away, had a
absolutely.
lot of out of
Hmm.
offices, and no one,
Right.
you don't want someone working on this while they're on vacation and
Hmm.
not focused, or a
Exactly.
surrogate with their kids and
Yeah.
her inability to read it carefully. And
Yes.
so yeah, like you said, you really can't rush it. I mean, you can have a reasonable
Hmm.
expectation for getting it
Right.
done, but
Hmm.
it can take some time.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes, like, the surrogate or the intended parents may want to propose some changes, and
Yes,
the contract needs to be reviewed again, and just takes more time. And we always tell intended parents, this is a step you do not want to rush.
right. Yes, of course, we want to work on it in a timely manner. And sometimes it
Hmm.
just depends on the speed of not just the lawyers, but of the client. So, like if I send a
Absolutely.
draft and the parents are away for a week, that's the we have to wait the week. I mean, so
Absolutely.
it's a matter of
Absolutely.
making the priority for the clients as well, surrogate
Hmm.
parents, to make to the
Yes.
time to read through a 70-page contract, which is not easy to do.
Absolutely. Yep. And tenant parents out there, if you're listening, please, if you receive, the contract from your attorney, make sure you read it carefully because
Yes.
you don't want to just like put your signature on it without knowing what's in your contract.
And the review with their attorney just goes so much better when the parties come to me having read it,
Hmm.
they have questions. It's just a more fruitful
Absolutely.
conversation
Hmm.
versus so and go, I got it, but I won't even I won't even really do the review if they haven't read it yet because what I
Hmm.
can't explain every word of a 70 plus
Yeah.
contract, you know?
Absolutely.
Please read it. And if you don't understand the language, have it translated.
Yep.
You know, and
Yeah,
by
absolutely.
legal translator is
Hmm.
ideal. I mean, I know that adds expense, but again, my office can provide translation services over the phone, but as part of
Hmm.
like my typical, we're not legally translating a document into another language.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
There's too much room for error that I would never want to have happen.
Hmm.
So if you have doubt, have it professionally legally translated so you can.
Translated. Yes, absolutely. We always encourage international intended parents whose first language is not English, to have legal translation to have a copy of legally translated contract, or just to make sure they understand their contract inside out. And, if English is not the language they're 100% comfortable with, make sure you have it translated and understand what the contract is about.
Yes, for sure.
And okay, so now we talked about the contract and, after the intended parents and their surrogate sign the legal contract and, the journey moves on to amber
Yes.
transfer, everything goes well, the surrogate is pregnant. Let's talk about parentage.
Okay.
So, can you tell us about how parentage is legally established for international intended parents and, for both parents using their, sperm and eggs and versus one parent being
Yeah.
genetically linked to the child? Does the other
Sure.
parent have to go through adoption? And you can just walk us through the process.
Yeah, I mean, again, my legal answer is it depends. It really depends on the state law that they're proceeding under. I can just
Mm-hmm.
give Florida as an example. Florida is a post-birth state where we have to get a post-birth order,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the genetics of the parent, or if it's a same-sex, single parent. You need a post-birth order in Florida, but our vital
Right.
statistics that issues birth certificates do not accept the pre-birth order. I
Mm-hmm.
always get a pre-birth order because it is immensely helpful at the hospital to walk in there
Mm-hmm.
with a court order. So I always get both. But
Okay.
to really truly understand the process, I couldn't give an overview of every state. But I do think it's important for international intended parents when they speak to their attorney to ask your lawyer, will I need to appear at a hearing? Will I need,
Mm-hmm.
will my surrogate need a lawyer later on as well so you can budget that expense? Because typically in
Mm-hmm.
Florida, the surrogate won't need to be represented later on, but some states
Mm-hmm.
do require both lawyers at the parental rights process. So
Okay.
it's also important for the intended parents to understand how long does it take to get the court order that's needed for the birth certificate? And even more importantly, how long does it take to get the birth certificate in that state? Because the parent cannot apply for a US passport until they
Mm.
have the birth certificate. So
Right.
that helps lead to the understanding of how long a parent might need to budget to stay in the US,
Mm-hmm.
because one parent will have to be here. There is an affidavit that the State Department will allow one. I've had one parent go home for health
Mm-hmm.
reasons or work,
Mm-hmm.
where one parent can stay and apply for the passport. There's a certain affidavit
Mm-hmm.
that has to be signed. But
Mm-hmm.
every state is different on how long it
Yep.
takes to get the birth certificate. Florida
Right.
is roughly 2 to 3 weeks from the birth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's a long time. I mean, to have to stay, and it could be longer. So,
Absolutely. So, okay, well, let's say if medically everything goes well, after birth, the baby is perfectly healthy and doesn't need
yeah,
any additional medical care. Um, how long, say, like baby is born in Florida, how long roughly and after birth can a parent bring their baby home? Say
I would
accounting the,
say,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks. Okay.
And that's given nothing like COVID happens again, where US
Right.
passports just went into it was chaos where you couldn't get,
Yep.
but now the services are back up and running for
Hmm.
expedited, essentially same day passports.
Hmm.
Um, and if a parent needs to get a different type of passport from their, local embassy, that timing might
Right.
change. I mean,
Okay.
I always like to be a little more conservative because I would, it's difficult when a parent has to change their flight. So I would say
Hmm.
probably safely more like 3 weeks.
Hmm.
Um, but it really would depend on each state. So I wouldn't take my advice for every state within the United States. I would talk to your lawyer about the timing so you can
Yes,
kind of budget. And it's
absolutely.
a great, like, as I mentioned about staying in touch with your lawyer, like my
Hmm.
advice at the beginning of someone's process could change mid process. So touch base at second trimester saying, hey, how are things looking? What's the timing like
Hmm.
now
Yes.
in case there's changes?
Exactly. I think that's great advice because, surrogacy and egg donation and surrogacy together, especially, is such a long process. Sometimes intended parents, will acquire a lot of information from the beginning. They will talk to
Yeah,
attorneys, talk to agency,
right.
talk to clinic, and they get everything they need. And at the beginning, they think, okay, this is how it's going to work. But given how long things take,
Yeah,
and how long this process takes, and how things could change. And by the
yeah,
time you get to that step, things may not be exactly the same. So I think that's great advice to, just
yeah,
check in with your attorney, check in with the professionals you're working with, even if you're
yeah.
not quite at that step yet, just to get an update and if there have been changes and you know how to prepare for them.
Yeah, and I welcome those updates when people reach out. I'm happy to
Hmm.
check in. I'm a big supporter of communication. I think actually communication for this whole process is the key. Good communication
Hmm.
with agency, surrogate, maybe not with egg donor because many times there's no communication, but just
That's
just
right.
having good communication and feeling like you're in the loop and having the knowledge will help
Hmm.
alleviate a lot of stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question, some intended parents ask, domestic or internationally, will ask is, will the surrogate's name be on the child's birth certificate? Would,
Yeah.
so looking at the birth certificate of a child born through surrogacy, would it
Mhm.
show the child was born through surrogacy?
Yeah, again, I don't want to answer for all the states in case my answer changes. But for example, in Florida, the surrogate will not be on the birth certificate.
Hmm.
In Florida, there's a worksheet that's filled out at the hospital that the surrogate's name does go on. It is an internal form, but the
Hmm.
one and only birth certificate in Florida does
Hmm.
not reference the surrogate. It doesn't say amended. It doesn't reference the
Hmm.
surrogacy. It's
Hmm.
just a fresh birth certificate as if the parents delivered this baby. And that's likely the case for almost all the states. But again,
Hmm.
I don't want to give advice for other states where I'm not
Yeah,
licensed. So, but that's a good
right.
question to ask. How does it look? Is it an amended birth certificate? Because in Florida, the one and only is with the parent or the parents. And
Hmm.
international intended parents have to let me know if they need apostille documents. It's a stamp
Hmm. Right.
um, given by the Department of State that certifies for that particular country what it's an additional document stamp that they need that domestic intended parents don't need. So that's an
Right.
important thing to know. And typically it would be done on the birth certificate and possibly the court order.
Hmm. What about, parents who, I guess only one of the parents is genetically linked to the baby? Would the other parent's name be on the birth certificate as well, or do
In
they need to go
Florida,
through
in
adoption?
Florida,
Hmm.
yes, there's no in the law in Florida, we allow all types of parents, one parent, donor embryo, one genetic connection.
Hmm.
Doesn't change. The surrogate's never on that birth certificate. There are some states that I'm aware of that do require what's called a step parent or second parent adoption to put the non-genetic parent on the birth certificate. It's
Hmm.
not states that I work in that I personally, my firm can help in.
Right.
Like I've heard of it in Tennessee. I've heard of it
Yep.
happening and I've been
Right.
advised that that's something. But again, that's why you would need to talk to an attorney in that state to know
Exactly.
that is a possibility in certain places, probably not
Yes.
most, but some.
Absolutely. And, at FSC, we always avoid matching surrogates from those states with international intended parents,
Yeah,
where not both of them are genetically linked, just because it is a little bit more complicated and it may require longer time, a longer
yeah.
stay for the parents in the United
Longer
States
stay, more
after the baby is born.
expense, yeah, appearance at a hearing, additional legal fees.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
so it's a matter
absolutely.
of, and even understanding the state laws change. I mean, just recently,
Hmm.
Michigan legalized surrogacy. So where everyone was
That's
afraid
right.
of Michigan, now it's available. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of understanding at that time and, at the time of the match,
Hmm.
what the law will require and what the process will be like.
Exactly. So, well, I think we covered a lot of topics today. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing, for sharing your insights. But before it lets you go, can you just give us some advice? What advice would you give to intended parents when selecting an attorney or an agency to guide them through their process, of surrogacy or egg donation?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, my number one thing I think that allows for a smooth journey is communication. So just having a
Yes.
feel that you can comfortably communicate with that provider, be it the agency,
Mm.
the lawyer. I hear other parents tell me, "Oh, I reached out to a lawyer and I didn't hear back for like a week or whatever." Like that wouldn't make me feel comfortable. So
Right.
feeling comfortable, I mean, as a language barrier, making sure that you feel that you can like communicate with your language to that
Yes.
provider.
Absolutely. Hmm.
I can provide certain translations, not all. So I obviously want
Hmm.
my clients to feel comfortable with me and what my
Hmm.
limitations are.
Yep.
And just, to the best extent possible, doing your research that somebody has just the experience of what they're doing. I mean, just the other day, I was, going to represent on a self match, where this surrogate wanted to work with an attorney. When I went to their website, they did insurance, personal injury,
Oh,
uh, you
wow.
know, and I was like, please don't do that. Work
Right,
with
yep.
somebody that knows what they're doing. This is not something to dabble in. It makes it
Exactly.
so much more difficult for everyone involved when the lawyers aren't experienced in this area of law. So work with someone that
Yes.
has good experience and like this is what they do. This is what they focus
Yes.
on. Um,
100%. I always
yeah,
tell intended parents, make sure you work with an attorney that specializes in this field. You don't want to, if you have a heart issue, you don't want to go see a
yeah,
dermatologist.
exactly. Yeah, like I wouldn't do what I don't do, and it's like important. I mean,
Yep.
lawyers have an obligation to be competent in what they're doing, and it just makes the process a lot smoother when everybody knows this process, the pitfalls, what goes into an agreement, and to have two lawyers involved. I know FSC would always require that. And so, yeah, just making sure communication to me is key for this whole process, like feeling you have good channels, good responsiveness. And that's something I really try to always maintain and provide to my clients and to the agency. Like I always am in good
Yes.
contact with FSC. Like I'm not going to just like, I like to keep
Hmm.
everyone in the loop on where things are.
Absolutely. I think that is very, very important. And I love everything you just shared with us today. Thank
Thank you.
you so much again, Marla, for joining us. And we
Thank
really,
you.
really appreciate it. And intended parents out there, if you're listening and if you have additional questions that we didn't get to cover today, please feel free to reach out to Marla. Feel free to reach out to FSC. And Marla, before we let you go, can you please share with us how intended parents can reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're welcome to call me at 954-761-2929 or email me. I always respond quickly. My email, and hopefully we can share it in the notes, is Marla, Marla dot Neufeld, Neufeld at gmlaw.com. And I'll provide all that information so it can easily be seen in front of you for the
Yes,
show.
absolutely.
Feel free to reach out.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much again,
Thank
Marla.
you.
Thank you everyone out there for listening to us. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.